All right, welcome back to Rhetorical Analysis, Lecture Part 2. When you're writing a rhetorical analysis, your goal, the whole purpose of this essay, is to ask yourself, is a certain text effective? You can study a speech, like we looked at last time. You can study a novel. You can study poetry, plays, the work of Shakespeare. This happens to be Derek Walcott, the Nobel Prize-winning West Indian playwright and poet. You can study graphic novels. I really recommend speeches. They're very concise, and they're meaningful. They're full of purpose, and they're usually really pretty short. So they fit the scope and scale of the assignment well. All right. So we're going to continue here with arrangement, and then we'll get into style. So here, let me pause it here. We'll go back to where we left off last time. So here we continue on page 26. These are the three types of discourse, or what you might also think of as the three occasions in which or where we as people are asked to speak, for a legal reason, for political reasons, or for ceremonial or for celebratory reasons. And on this page, they're really just examples of each of these, some famous examples of all of these types of speech. And I've basically broken the organizational, or the study of organization, down by these points. So under legal speech, we're going to look at the two most influential people who influence how legal speech is put together. So first we'll look at Corax of Syracuse, who we introduced last time. His basic argument has 4 parts. 1 is the introduction, also called a proem. 2 is the narration, very similar to essay 1. We're going to tell the story, tell the tale. Part 3 is argument, or essentially the proof. What proof do you have that your position or your case is true? And this is broken down, part 3 is broken down into 2 parts. Confirmation is the proof you have that proves what you say is true. In the context of when and why this was written, it would be like, what's the evidence you have that this is yours, that this property is yours, or this cow is yours, or something along those lines. And the refutation would be any evidence you have against someone else who might be making a similar claim, like a counterclaim, on the same piece of property. Like, what do you have any evidence that would say, your claim is more valid than their claim to this property? And then the last thing would be a summary or peroration. The summary, we know what summaries are, who, what, why, where, when, how. And then the peroration is essentially a climactic rhetorical device, or something. Actually, a really good example of someone who uses peroration beautifully is Dr. King. If you look at Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, he used a variety of different peroration techniques. There is, if we go back and look at the climax of the speech, well, climax itself is a device. There's the series of anaphoras, the metaphors. Yeah, there's a lot of things working in the peroration towards the end of that speech that make Dr. King's speech that much more effective. Cicero devised a 6-point argument for legal issues, where you would begin with securing the goodwill of your audience. Let me see if I have an example of that here. Hang on a second. You don't really have to wait because this is all on video. So this is Dr. King's A Letter from Birmingham Jail. The whiteness of the screen is totally paling out my video, but that's okay. If we look at the very beginning of it here, it's a beautiful example of what we were just talking about there. Cicero's idea that you should begin with securing the goodwill of your audience, that should be high among your list of concerns as a speaker. So let's look at the beginning of this. He begins it here. Dr. King begins, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities, quote, unwise and untimely, unquote. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that crossed my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of a day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But, since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill, and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. Now, he's talking to people who are antithetical to, in many ways at least, to his ideas of civil rights and progress. But look at the approach, right? You are people of genuine goodwill. Your criticisms are sincere. You're good people. You are sincere people. Let's work this out, right? These are very, as well as he states it, these are patient and reasonable terms, right? He is beginning exactly this way here with at least a very substantial attempt to secure the goodwill of his audience. The next thing Cicero talks about is to state the case. What exactly is your argument? Define the dispute. Where is the area of disagreement among the parties concerned? Part 4 and 5 are like the argument part of Corax's speech, where you have your proof. Yeah, the allegations would be your proof of what you say is true. Disprove the opponent's allegations is like a counter argument where you're arguing against the person who might have a counterclaim against what you're saying. And then part 6, the peroration, Cicero doesn't really think of it as a rhetorical device the way that Corax does. He just looks at the peroration as kind of an opportunity for summary, an opportunity to expand and reinforce what was already stated. And that is the Ciceronian argument. So it has 6 parts, and it is distinctly different from most other approaches, which is why I find it really interesting. Corax's, I should say, is not that interesting. It's just the foundation. Cicero's, on the other hand, he borrows the peroration, right? The goodwill he adds, right? That's new. And defining the dispute. So he adds some distinct things here which make his approach unique and valuable. And it does go on to talk about research I've done and where he talks about where to use ethos, where to use pathos. I invite you to look at that because it's very useful. Now, this is the second one, not last one. When we look at political speech, there are some examples there of great text to look at when you're looking at, who writes about political speech. Aristotle, Cicero, Quintilian are kind of the classics. Okay, and this is the Aristotelian Argument. The funny thing, like we mentioned about the Aristotelian Argument, is it's really not that original. All he did is take Corax of Syracuse's argument and add some detail to it. Here it is in all 4 parts at once. You can see it is literally the exact same thing. He doesn't change anything. What Aristotle does do is he expands. So he essentially takes the Corax model and expands. So he expands it to say in the introduction should pave the way, as it were, for what is to follow. We want to dispel objections. Perhaps it would be useful there to deny alleged facts, or if you're not going to deny that things happened, you might at least appeal that no injury was intentional, no injustice was intentional, or maybe even occurred, if that is true in that case. Narration, you want to tell us what happened, right? Survey the actions of what happened. Our argument, Aristotle actually breaks it down into 3 parts. So he does actually add a little something here, but it's not significant. yeah, essentially this is the same, right? Argument is the proof section. That would be the major part of any argument would be the proof. So you have your proof, the proof against your opponent's position. And then if it's a court of law, you have your interrogation there. In the epilogue, Aristotle suggests 4 different things that you want to achieve in the conclusion. You want to make the audience well disposed towards yourself and ill disposed towards your opponent. So make the audience or the jury maybe love you, or the audience love you and dislike your opponent. You want to magnify or minimize the leading facts. And what Aristotle means here is that if you feel like you've won the argument, you want to magnify and accentuate the areas where you felt like your argument was successful. If, however, you felt like it was not, you want to kind of minimize the areas where it was less than successful. Part C, you want to excite the required state of emotion. So he doesn't specify here, he's just talking about pathos, the appeal of emotion. And D, to refresh or basically summarize. And that, my friends, is the Aristotelian argument in a nutshell. If you go on and read, it will expand and tell you where to put the ethos, where to put the pathos, where to put the logos. I love these. These are a bit out of the scope of what we have to teach in this class, but if you have time to read Politics and the English Language by George Orwell, it's extremely informative about style, about rhetoric. All right, last thing we can get to this right here, ceremonial speech. So ceremonial speech, as it will break down right here, has many different parts. Essentially, it's celebratory usually, but not always, right? Could be a funeral, graduation, commencement, a keynote address, award speeches, retirement speeches. I mean, one thing that we're probably all familiar with are maybe commencement addresses. You can look them up on YouTube, and award speeches, right? If you ever watch, like I like to watch, the Mark Twain Award for comedy every year. That's a funny, you get to see some funny speeches and a celebration of funny people. My wife loves to watch the Oscars, so we see speeches there as well. Retirement speeches, you may be familiar with, when athletes retire, they will give their retirement speech, or if they get their Hall of Fame induction, they'll, that would be like more like an award speech, This section, though, we're going to skip because it focuses only on one speech. So it really does give you a thorough breakdown of one of the great funeral orations of all time. All right, so commencement addresses, which is another type of ceremonial speech. Commencement addresses basically are filled with moral advice. They instruct, they warn, they reflect, they advise, they persuade. These are wonderful to look at. There are a number of these linked up to our webpage. If you want to write a analysis of a commencement address, this is also a really famous one here, David Foster Wallace's I think how's the water? If I'm remembering the tagline correctly, or what's water or something is like the tagline. It's a brilliant commencement address. That one would be good to look at as well. All right, so that's probably as far as we can get here. Let's go ahead and pause it.